The latest. Thank you for your love and support. I appreciate you all. One day they say shall never cease to happen in Africa. These people can never stop talking about the three wise men in Africa. While the world elite gathered at the Hotel Barisha Hall for the Munich Security Conference, one region dominated the conversation: the Sahel. For the first time, they weren't just talking about us, they had to listen to us. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso were the ghosts in that room. The West is desperate for a point of no return, but the Sahel has already crossed the Rubicon. They cannot just believe that we are no longer looking for masters. We are masters of our own, dictating the rules and the regulations. Sitting on that stage was a sister who brought the fire of the South, Otilia Ann Monganizi, from the Institute for Security Studies. She didn't just let the security first narrative slide. She reminded the global elite that we are dealing with a young continent in Burkina Faso. The median age is just 18. Those young lions don't care about the Western lectures on democracy when they are hungry and under fire. Otilia stood firm, making it clear that livelihood, food security, and education are the priorities, not the geopolitical games of foreign powers. She looked them in the eye and said the conversation must include the people of those countries.
Niger, Burkina, and Mali have an amazing endowment of uranium, of lithium, of manganese, and of gold. When people talk about critical minerals, these four are among those that are mentioned. These are not poor countries, but they are countries where people are poor because even the governance of those resources right now still is not with those three countries.
We've not had a strange relationship with these countries. I've been to two of those countries on a couple of occasions to engage them, because as a young military officer, I inherited a situation that's similar to what I have today. So, but of course, geopolitics and other factors beyond our region are actually driving that situation. And so if we have to re-engage them, I have maintained a bridge. I was in Burkina Faso. I've been to Burkina Faso twice to engage the leadership. I've been to Mali. I've not been to Niger. So I have a bridge across which I can actually walk comfortably to engage them. I know their situation. I know their fears. And but what actually drove them, to leave the Ecowas community is totally different. And I want to encourage them, and I'm trying to encourage them to know that, as we have rightly characterized, that conflict is beyond their means, not even West Africa alone, and a practical approach to that, a pragmatic approach to that will be to engage all their neighbors, including Mauritania, Algeria. We in the sub-region, the Europeans have been making efforts to join us, but they need a platform, and we are trying to have a strategy that will encompass the concerns of all of the partners that are interested in resolving that conflict. So I believe that they should, to my colleagues in the three countries, to have a world view, to understand where the world is going. It is in a state of flux, as we all know. Things are happening so quickly and so fast, and we have over 400 million citizens in West Africa that need socio-economic development. So we don't want to be bogged down by just one situation. They should also make the effort, and as we are making effort to engage them, they should be receptive to what we are proposing to them, because it is in our general interest in the sub-region not only to resolve this, but also the benefits to like economic integration across West Africa. 470 million, that is a sober market for us to use as the basis for going forward. So we are very much poised. We won't give up on them. We hope that they can understand. And we also, as we try to engage, we should bear in mind the fact that we don't go and think that the old order of doing things. We should bear in mind the political realities of today, which should actually define our relationship with these countries.
Thank you. Ambassador, can you walk us a little bit through the key elements of the EU's new approach, and maybe with a reference to what you already mentioned about Russia and Russia's narrative?
Well, okay, thank you very much for that. So, effectively, in end of November, we, at the level of the European Union foreign ministers, adopted the so-called renewed approach. The renewed approach is based on three elements. The first is intensified political and diplomatic engagement. Now, that might sound like the vacuous conversation of diplomats without any real meaning. It isn't actually. The nature of our conversation has been a fundamental problem in the relations between us and the region, and we need to correct that. We need to be a lot better at listening. We need to be a lot better at explaining where we're coming from and explaining that we have a number of interests. We're not there just because we like to be nice neighbors. We're there because we have concerns. And that has been very well received. I was in Niger about 3 weeks ago, earlier this week in Burkina, next week in Mali. It's been extremely well received. Secondly, human security. 3 military regimes came to power saying there's a security problem, we're military, we know how to deal with it. Now they're all saying, actually the problem is much more than military. We need to have an integrated approach. Sarah Jacobs was talking about this as well, and President Bio. And this is, I think, recognized. Our suggestion is, okay, let's work together with you on community-based justice, on issues that are responding to access to basic social services. This is what stops people from joining, being recruited into the ranks of terrorist groups. And thirdly, socioeconomic resilience, creation of employment opportunities, infrastructuring, small access roads so that people can get produce to market. So these three elements, political diplomatic engagement, human security, and socioeconomic resilience, I think give us a lot to work on. I'm happy to spend the next hour, but I don't want to abuse. I would love another moment if there is a chance to come back to Russia, though.
We will come back to Russia, but let's first turn to the US. Listening to what the EU is planning, what, in your point of view, should US policy be in the Sahel going forward? Or how does Congress plan to engage with this issue? Can you share a little bit?
Sure. So, I think in order to think about what we need to do going forward, we really need to reckon with the failures of our past approach. In a lot of these countries, the U.S. would go in, we would train an elite special forces unit often, because our own system is so mismatched in terms of how much resources our Department of Defense gets versus our diplomacy and our development. We would put in a lot of resources to the military side without any of the requisite sort of governance approaches. And then we were surprised when all of a sudden that mismatch that we exported turned into coups. And so I think it's important that we first recognize the role we played and the problems and failures with our strategy to this point. And then, moving forward, I think it's about maintaining relations. I think we should have diplomatic relations with everybody. It's about understanding what partnership really looks like and means. I appreciate the three sort of areas that the EU is focused on. I think it's partially about us recognizing that at this moment, it feels very hard for us to go into other countries and lecture them about human rights and how they should be respecting their populations when we see what's happening both within the United States and among our allies. And I think it's also about not just letting the fact that Russia is there dictate that the United States needs to engage in a certain way. I think too often we think that we have to engage in a certain way because Russia or China is there, and I think that actually leads our foreign policy in a really dangerous direction. But I will say to President Bio's point that this is a broader regional challenge, I'm really proud that the U.S. Congress passed the Global Fragility Act, which is a sort of new strategic approach, whole of government, to how the U.S. is going to engage. And coastal West Africa is one of our key starting regions because we know that we need to help shore up the coastal West African states as they are facing this pressure coming from the north.
Thank you. Minister, from your point of view, and I know you have been very engaged with terrorist questions, what are the prospects of reintegrating the Sahel countries into regional organizations and initiatives? What's your point of view about that?
I think that the integration, well, it has already been mentioned by the President, by His Excellency the President. But first of all, it's a question of trust. We need to to get back this trust and confidence between the different partners in the countries. We need a technical cooperation, and this must continue. We also need to have a partnership which must be visible at an economic level. And we also need security dialogue, and this needs to be pragmatic. And I think all of that will benefit trust, and I think it's really important. Thank you.
How can Europe rebuild trust? A lot of failures of Euro opened the door for Russia, and we'll talk about Russia soon. But can you share insights about building trust?
Right. So fundamentally, one of the triggers, let's say, that led to popular support even within the three Sahelian countries that we're speaking about had to do with the involvement not of Europe in its entirety, but of specific actions within Niger and Mali in particular, but also in Burkina, whether it was through the actions and the response. And I liked your response around, yes, we can have military involvement and action, but it has to be complemented, right? It has to be one that understands the context well. So even the question now that you asked around, is there prospects for the, let's say, the G5 Sahel, or even return to entities like the Multinational Joint Task Force dealing with Boko Haram. These are institutions that exist and that are African institutions, but that were supported by European actors and stakeholders. The breakdown of trust, say, related to a number of different issues. The one related to, of course, disagreement on how to deal with the violent extremist threat and the manner in which to handle it. The second, and it was no coincidence that the first two instruments that the Niger authorities sought to repeal once they had taken power in 2023 related to the smuggling and trafficking of persons. They argued that the number of people coming from Niger going towards Europe did not justify these laws because they were transit zones. So why are they being punished for being zones through which people move and not being the countries of departure themselves? Then the third is a political disagreement, almost an ideological political disagreement. These are all three former colonies of France. So the fight necessarily wasn't so much an opposition to everything and all things European, as you heard from Special Representative Cravigno. The engagement now, led as it is by a Portuguese Special Representative, is well received. we cannot ignore the impact that perceptions on a relationship can have, even in its implementation. I would argue, and I end with this, that the process of rebuilding trust requires doing some of the things that weren't done before. Consultation. When choosing to deploy in a territory of another country, having those conversations, even if they seem to take too long, even if they make an impatient person even more impatient, ensuring that they are part of the process, not just being discussed in their absence.
Special Representative, please, now your intervention or your thoughts on how to react to the Russian narratives. What's the approach of Europe, and how do you keep Europe united in that specific question? And I would like the audience to make itself ready. This is the last question to the panel, and then I open up to the audience.
Well, thank you very much. So when we talk about the Russian influence in the Sahel, I think it's very important to say to our Sahelian friends, we are interested in Sahel because of the Sahel. We're not just interested because we have a geopolitical competition going on with Russia. However, this geopolitical competition is a large part of the reason why Russia is there. Russia is there because it is interested in establishing itself in this, what it sees as the soft underbelly of NATO. And I'm very concerned that Russia, when it establishes eventually some willingness to go to the table to reach some kind of settlement with respect to its invasion of Ukraine, Russia will still remain Russia. And Russia will still remain interested in having leverage, in having the capacity to disturb the peace in the southern flank of NATO, the southern Europe. And therefore, it will have enormous excess capacity of people that it does not want back in its towns and villages, people who were already criminals before they went and are now battle-hardened. And these people, it's going to be only too happy to send down to the Sahel. So whereas today we have 2,000 Russians in Mali, I suspect that we could easily have 20,000 there. And their capacity to, together with Russia's investment in disinformation, can seriously destabilize unless we manage to work with the Sahelians very well over the next months and years. We need to reconquer their trust. And in order to do so, we need to refashion our approach. We have the instruments, though, to do this, though.
Thank you. I now look to the audience and turn around. Please, Saif, lovely to have you here, Ambassador. And maybe we collect 2 or 3 questions. Thank
you very much, Astrid, and thank you very much for the panel for excellent discussion. I'll just try to build on what just Special Representative Cravinho mentioned, and also building on what Ottilia said. I think it's extremely important if we want to return to somewhere, point of return, to return to trust. And return to trust here, it is extremely important to acknowledge, to update the approach, and to acknowledge that there is no solution without a strong state. The strong state in Africa in general, and wherever we have conflicts, a strong state is essential. It is like the hardware, and then you insert the software that you want. This type of governance, this type of approach to women, to youth, to economic development, but without the hardware, we will continue, we will return back to the point that we have been through in the last 20 years. A weak state without managing to tackle the root cause. The root cause here is the a lack of presence of the state. Just a comment, and I'm sure that maybe later we can discuss the wide array of root causes.
Unfortunately, we have 15 minutes left, and I was somebody told me it's really important to end sharp. I'm sorry. So, anybody here in the panel that wants to react, or shall we go to the next question? Please, I see a gentleman over there, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Yaki Celia. I do long-term forecasting on Africa's future, and the Having looked quite in detail at the 5 Sahelian countries, the drivers of instability and conflict are deep and structural. It's primarily an extremely large youth bulge and high levels of fertility, lack of adequate jobs and employment, and so on. None of these problems are amenable to short-term solutions. The ambassador there mentioned the challenge of investing in state building. So the traditional approach to dealing with insurgency has always been, particularly from Europe, has been to try and match the way of engagement with making sure that there's all the additional elements of good governance are improved. I would tend to argue that one of the reasons why the Sahel turned to the Russians is because they provided, for better or for worse, in this case for worse, an alternative promise of security. Europe needs to invest in the provision of security. Without security, nothing else is possible. And I think that that essential reality, given the structural causes, remains true. It may not be a reality we like, but I think it is absolutely imperative.
Thank you. And do you have a question to anybody in the panel how we can, well, make progress in security and providing security?
It means that Europe must be prepared to provide hard security support to the government, including training, provision of arms. There is no other way. There is also other strategies that need to be adopted, working with religious leaders and so on and so forth, to deal with the promise that radical Islam presents in the region. But that's a different. Those are ancillary strategies to the essential need to focus on the provision of security to the government if Europe wants to play a meaningful role. It's not a pleasant message, I'm fully aware of that.
Ottilia, I see you, 2 fingers, and Sarah, please.
Brief, and it's really, thank you so much, Ambassador Kandil, for your remarks, particularly around governance. I think if there can be 2 elephants in a room, there are 2 elephants in the room that we haven't quite touched on. You touched on the first, which relates to the authority of the state in all of its territory, and the need. Even we can have a conversation around, as the President alluded to, around the 3 Sahelian states rejoining ECOWAS. But when you look at the need even to establish a trilateral arrangement through the Alliance of Sahelian States, that was built in a recognition that perhaps individually we're not strong enough to deal with and to counter some of these issues, right? But recognizing that the region for them still matters. And I say this because if you look at the expanse of Niger and Mali in particular, even when they were dealing with some of the issues around smuggling or trafficking of persons, right? What was happening in Niamey versus what was happening in Agadez was different. You need a central authority, and this is what they are working towards establishing, because you can have a government in power, but if they do not have the authority on the entire territory, some of the issues that we discuss cannot be handled easily. And I think we have to recognize that. The other one is a very brief elephant in the room. Niger, Burkina, and Mali have an amazing endowment of uranium, of lithium, of manganese, and of gold. When people talk about critical minerals, these 4 are among those that are mentioned. These are not poor countries, but there are countries where people are poor because even the governance of those resources right now still is not with those 3 countries.
Representative Sarah, please.
Yes, and I'm sorry that my back is to those of you I'm responding to, but you know, I want to respond to both of what is said, which is that I think it's true. At its root, this is a challenge of governance. And we also have to recognize that if you're just extending state power that is corrupt, that is actually exploiting its own populations, you're not actually going to solve the problem because the people are still going to feel like they don't have a state, whether it's a weak state or too strong of a state. And I actually do want to push back on this idea that you need to focus on security first, because I would argue actually that's what got us here. You had Operation Burkina, you had Burkhan, sorry. You had, all the things the United States was doing, the Trans-Sahel counterterrorism partnership, all of the U.S. military in Niger, all of the training of troops and forces that we were doing in these countries, but without the requisite investment in governance and in the kind of extension of state power that actually serves the people. And I would argue that's how we got here. And I think we need to recognize, yes, right now the Russians are offering this alternative with the Africa Corps and before that Wagner, but they're not working. Africa Corps is actually not making these countries safer, and these countries are starting to recognize that. And so the idea that we need to just do something because the Russians are, to me, is actually a real misreading of the situation and how we got here.
How can you be talking about Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso when they are not in your presence? And our sister, show them what they always do wrong. And now, Africa, we are talking with pride, we are talking with boldness, and we are making these people to understand we will no longer come and just be the listeners, taking instructions, but also to be part of this mission. To her right sat the current Ecowas chairperson, President Julius Maada Bio. You could feel the tension. As the head of the regional bloc, he's trying to build a bridge back to AES nations. Bio admitted that this conflict is beyond the means of any one nation. He talked about his own history as a young military officer, connecting with the current leaders in the Sahel. You know how they do it best. But he warned that the old order is dead. Is he truly sure when it comes to democratic elected? The world is in a state of flux, and the Sahel isn't waiting for permission anymore. Is it the president of Ecowas that is speaking this way? My brothers and sisters, let's ask this question. Then came the Western voices. Sarah Jacob from the U.S. Congress dropped a truth bomb, admitted that Western counter-terrorism policy for the last 25 years has been a total failure. They exported a security-first approach that actually fueled the very coups they are now complaining about. And of course, they had to mention Russia. The U.S. representative, Mr. Kravino, expressed deep fear about Russia's influence in what he called the soft underbelly of NATO. But let's be real. Russia is only there because the West left a void. The Sahel leaders didn't choose Russia for fun. They chose a solution when they were being hunted. These people just can't believe that they have done something wrong, and that is the reason to which we are moving away. The panel ended, but the message was clear. There is no point of return to the old colonial ways. The Sahel is rich in gold, lithium, and in uranium. They are not poor countries. They are countries where the people have been kept poor. And for that matter, we are rewriting our history. Africa is never a poor continent like the way they made us to believe. And because of that, a lot of people lost faith in our own continent. And we believe in the narrative of other people. And as much as we are moving out, these people are moving in. But the time has come for us all to say, no, this is the time that we join the voices that are speaking the truth, and for us to reclaim our power. And I wish the youth of today will stop dancing, will stop doing those unnecessary things, and we will all join hands together to pray to reconscientize our mentality, so together we can get ourselves back. Until we reconscientize the mentality, like Bob Marley said, emancipating ourselves, it will be difficult for us to make sure we set ourselves free. And that is the reason to which these people continue to push things that you, the African, will love, that will not make us channel the energy into reconscientizing our mentalities. And I hope one day we will all wake up to that reality and to understand that the power of the African lies in our own hands, and our freedom lies in our own hands, and not the political freedom that we claim we have. We are the only ones that can set ourselves free. United we stand, divided we fall, and united we keep standing forever and ever. The greatest enemy of the African is mental slavery. So let's decolonize ourselves from mental slavery. Let's keep sharing to educate our brothers and sisters. Together we make Africa great for ourselves and the next generations that are going to come. So that's the latest around the world, in Europe and in Germany.